Production funding for Arts Upload has been provided in part by Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation, Hall Family Foundation, Francis Family Foundation, the Hartwig Family, Richard J. Stern Foundation for the Arts, Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Randy Mason.
I'm Marisol.
Our show is called Arts Upload, and this week we're coming to you from the Mills Record Company.
But we'll take you to the Kemper Museum for a story about building bridges.
Also, another look at the man of many musical hats, Clint Ashlock.
Plus, living room concerts and art that helps teach math.
It's all ahead on the Upload.
Let's start with a story that continues her collaboration with Casey Studio Magazine.
Sia Armajani might not be a name you immediately recognize, but he is an internationally known sculptor born in Iran, based in Minneapolis.
A new exhibition of his works that focuses on bridges is now underway at the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art.
It's the kind of exhibition that prods, provokes, and inspires dialogue about what's in front of us and what's behind.
It's opening night for an exhibition at Kansas City's Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art.
As a team here at the museum, we're thrilled. The show came out beautifully and it really showcases his bridges in a lot of ways.
It's the first exhibition dedicated to 5 decades of bridge sculptures by Iranian-born artist Sia Armajani.
We're able to see his bridge work, not in chronology, but in our own way. Sia offers up to us these experiences to have on our own.
The success of the evening is down to a lot of careful preparation.
There's no walls in the space, which is unique to what we've been doing here at the museum. We've also redone the floors. We've got rid of a lot of the baseboards, which created this added framing to some of the works and how they were displayed. I'm delighted about this show even before any of the work has been brought into this space, because I think that this is it's a nice palette to work with. It's clean, it's clear.
The exhibit will comprise 30 pieces of Armajani's work.
Today, 3 of the large-scale drawings are being delivered.
The work is travelling to the museum from near and far, and it's all handled with enormous care.
Usual part of moving work, you just don't want to move it around too much. It's the best way.
Around 16 years ago, Armajani visited Kansas City to prepare for a commission from the Sosland Publishing Company, which is based here. He was inspired by our bridges.
One is a gift from the Sosland Family Foundation to the Kemper Museum. That's our signature piece and kind of really the impetus for this show. I'm really excited to have these here because from a distance you can certainly see the architectonic nature of everything, but up close it's so delicate and precise.
At the end of last year, Erin paid a visit to Armajani at his studio in Minneapolis.
You know, I read a little bit about what Armajani wrote about bridges too, and he always kind of said a bridge is a table. And one of the first things that we did together at his studio was we sat across from each other at a table. He was actually activating a bridge space just between the two of us in conversation at the table. I simply asked him, have you ever had an exhibition before that's been dedicated primarily to your bridges? And he said, no, that's why you're here. And I didn't even, it's like I didn't even know, I knew why I was there and I was planning an exhibition, but at that moment, he knew why I was there before I did. And then I realized the bridge was more than just the kind of structure of the bridge that we know today. And it all is tied up into this experience that he wants you to have, which is like learning more about yourself and about the person on the other side of the bridge, the person you're sharing the bridge with.
Some of Armajani's sculptures start to arrive.
I'm into my 3rd year here at the Kemper Museum, and I love it. I'm still learning things. I have this freedom to work in this space that's just an incredible exhibition space that we can transform each time we do a show.
Erin has a plan for how she'd like the art to be displayed. But first of all, she'll need to check how the pieces, once unpacked, work together.
I guess my philosophy in terms of exhibitions is like have it all there and know how many works and all these things, but like know that it's not a full commitment just yet in terms of where things go.
And she started to think about the bridge as a concept.
There's something significant there that I need to explore, not only with this show and with the collection, with the programs that we do here, but now and going forward.
Erin would like the museum to connect better with the communities around it, including the Ivanhoe neighbourhood to the east. But she's discovered that some residents face logistical problems.
One of the barriers that prevents people from coming to the museum is transportation. Your location in the city is not accessible by bus transportation or public transportation or anything like that. It can be very difficult to get here. Some evenings were open later so that people who are working various shifts are still able to come here. But then also, right now we do have a busing program for schools across the KC metro area. We want to grow that program even more out into different parts in the community. And so this is an exhibition that got me thinking about that even more.
Armajani has written, what is before the bridge, after the bridge, and below the bridge brings them together and makes them one neighbourhood. A bridge is part of the public landscape. It's opening night, and Sia Armajani's exhibition has drawn an appreciative crowd.
My reaction walking into this exhibition is how the whole gallery space has been opened up and activated by Armajani's work. The bridges are poetic and sculptural and very physically present as objects, but also as images that I think really inspire the imagination.
It's talking about communication, bridging the gap between two people, maybe that don't necessarily have a lot to say to each other very often.
And then he also brings in that Persian poet. There's something out of right field that just turns your head, and it's like, where'd that come from?
Sia Armajani is here with his wife, Barbara.
At the last minute, he decided that he wanted to come and enjoy the exhibition with everyone else when it first opened. So as you can imagine, I was a little bit nervous about that. It was always nice to do a walkthrough with the artist beforehand.
Armajani was very pleased with the exhibition, but declined to give an interview. He said he wanted his work to speak for itself.
It's nice when an artist doesn't give too much away and allows you to have your own experiences, and I think that that's what Sia gives to us.
Perhaps the exhibition will prompt us to think about the bridges we already have in our city and those that still need to be built.
The bridge has taken on a whole new shape for me. It's not a place that necessarily moves you over water anymore, or over a highway, or anything like that. It's much more than that.
Bridge Builder will be running at the Kemper through January 22nd. Along the way, Aaron Jedjick has programmed a number of exhibition-related events,
including a screening of Michael Price's documentary, Our Divided City, followed by a discussion on October 7.
You know, earlier this month at the Kauffman Center 5th birthday party, I could not help but notice once again how busy of a musician Clint Ashlock is.
The director of the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra plays with various other bands too, and he teaches at the Johnson County Community College.
Here's another look at a piece we first showed you last winter here on Arts Upload.
Trumpet heroes? Man, how long do we have? I mean, Freddie Hubbard and Woody Shaw and Clark Terry, and Lee Morgan, Chet Baker and Wynton Marsalis and Nicholas Payton and, you know, Stan Kessler. I mean, like the list, you know, is very deep. The most influential musician in my life has got to be Stevie Wonder. Songs in the Key of Life, I mean, that thing is like, that's always in my head. I kind of thought when I was, 22 or something that you graduated from music school and all of a sudden you were going to be this, musician, and that's all you did. And then in my mid-20s, just finding different things that would just fall in my lap. It's probably much better to be that way than to just pigeonhole yourself into being, I'm only going to play hard bop trumpet at a nightclub. I would not be doing anything, probably not even playing hard bop trumpet at a nightclub.
Here we go. That's why this cold December morning finds Clint getting the Johnson County Community College Jazz Ensemble ready for their end of the semester concert. Fine-tuning a spirited composition by his all-time favorite jazz man, John Coltrane.
And I don't think it's being snobbish, but I'm not going to give them, something that's just written arbitrarily for a college ensemble. I want to make sure to introduce them to something that has a lineage, that has a depth. And that's something that I think music education should be mindful of, is educating their students, not just to pressure them into knowing what an A-flat melodic minor scale is, but to make sure they're listening to great music.
This teacher does, on occasion, pull from an array of horns to make a musical point, something he learned from Bobby Watson at UMKC.
Almost every rehearsal, he came in with a saxophone. And you can't argue with the truth. Bobby would come in and he would just play it, and we'd be like, oh, that's what it sounds like. It's a much more expedient way to get to the information that he's trying to disseminate. But you do have to find a balance. You can't just play all the time.
School of another sort takes place here every Wednesday night. After 9 years upstairs at Harlings, Clint moved his new Jazz Order Big Band, first to the Broadway Jazz Club, then when it closed, to the Green Lady.
It's kind of become this commune for the younger jazz musicians on the scene to have an outlet to play, to read music, to read charts. It helps your musicianship a ton, just to go in and sight read songs, every week. The new Jazz Order Band is definitely an excellent outlet for blowing off of the steam and just kicking back and enjoying the music.
Ashlock finds joy in jazz no matter how it's packaged. He's fronted his own quintet and quartet and recently started backing vocalist Jessica Page. Then there's Project H, swimming in an original stew of 70s funk and fusion.
It's a great band. All of us are messed up somehow, so we get along that way. They're great songs. Ryan Heinlein writes brilliant, brilliant compositions. The joy that I get out of the music is trying to do something that I haven't ever done before. And sometimes it's just a giant failure, but sometimes you get that, you hit that 340-yard drive right down the middle, and it's like, oh, all right, that makes up for the ones that went into the woods. And Project H is a great outlet for that.
But the job with the highest visibility is this one, which puts him on stage 4 times a year at Hellsberg Hall. Directing the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra isn't technically a full-time job, but in reality, it's pretty darn close. Clint took the reins 3 years ago after the passing of his friend and mentor, Kerry Strayer.
The thing that makes that job so desirable for me, just because it's so many directions that we can go with it, and I really want it to develop over the next 30 years, not just the next 2. We've got some things coming up that I don't think that band maybe would have done a few years ago, and that's exciting.
Last fall also marked another milestone for the KCJO, a new recording. Overcoming the logistical challenges of getting 17 members and musical guests into Cypher Sound in time for a holiday release.
I did like a doodle poll of like every day in the month, and I had a matrix thing with all the dates. And then you've got to focus on the music, making sure that everything is written and copied off and legible and right. Everybody put in a lot of work on that record, and I think we're all proud of it. 1, 2, 3, 1. People that complain about being busy, I think they don't really like what they're doing. About once or twice a year, I'll realize how much time that I put into things, and whoa, that's a lot. And then I forget about it and just continue working. that people decide to come out and listen to you play or dance to you or anything to your music, it makes me feel really good as a musician. And it makes me really want to allow them to leave feeling way better about themselves than when they came.
Our show is called Arts Upload. But sometimes, I think Randy just finds ways to get us to help him do some shopping.
Hey, I got to admit that Mills Record Company is a pretty great place for vinyl enthusiasts. And you know, these days there's a lot more than there were not that long ago.
Judy Mills says people were skeptical when she opened their first location around the corner on Westport Road. Now, not so much.
They're really big on local here, and in-store performances, even got a little stage in the corner, and you know, that's something that record stores didn't do so much back in the day.
And speaking of performances, you know, Kansas City has its annual Front Porch Festival in the Valentine neighborhood.
This next story from Tampa Bay shows how they're taking it one step further than that.
We have a community that has hosts and artists, and the hosts are these music fans that love music so much that they're willing to have it in their living room, go through the work of organizing an event in their home, and give all the money to the artist, and even throw in a guest room for the night and feeding them. And it's just this really romantic notion of what a fan can be.
But you wow us with a simple explanation and a vow that's just plausible enough somehow.
One of the great things is that the artists that participate in what Fran's doing, we make connections with each other, you know, in addition to with the audiences. You just kind of grow in your musician family.
Everybody sets a totally different atmosphere, and I really liked that because it's not the same place, it's not the same setting. I've never been to this apartment, and everything is just a little different and a little new each time that I get to go to one of these house concerts.
As soon as I walked in tonight, I introduced myself to everybody that was there. You know, if you go to another concert, you're not going to meet anyone, but this, you had to do it because you're in somebody's house.
I think it's really important to get exposure to these singer-songwriters, so I'm happy that Fran is involved with that and that it's happening here.
I love that talk. I even like that sexy walk when you groove. You get my heart a-tapping.
Most artists, what we aspire to do is we want to sell records, but even more so than that, what we want to do is we want to have an audience. We dream about, you know, going to, you know, some hall and playing. The thing that's most important isn't that you're playing for a ton of people, even though that's welcome. The thing that we really, really want is the fact that there are people sitting down and listening to what we're doing.
I've hosted some house concerts myself. The talent out there is just, I can't believe that I'm seeing this talent right in front of me.
I also think it would be good for myself just to remind myself who is out there producing music.
You guys are going to be an awesome crowd already. I'm so excited to play some tunes for you. We are the Doll Sisters, and I want to make one thing clear. We are sisters. Our last name is Doll, and it is spelled D-O-L-L. It's not some stage name we came up with because we thought we were cute or something.
We love performing in house concert settings because we get a chance oftentimes before the shows to interact with the people and actually get to know them. And then I think they feel more comfortable with listening to our music and actually more comfortable with listening to our original music because they've kind of gotten to know a little bit of who we are.
They grew up in a one-horse town in the shade of the mountains high. Men go down as white as snow, come back up as black as night.
We like to write about things that I think are important to remember. We've written about our great-grandpa who went off to war and who died in Normandy. I think it's very important to keep history alive in music, especially. It's very helpful is when you're touring and you say you can't fill a weeknight spot, a house concert can be a really good way to fill it because people can get their friends to come over. It's just like a party. The other thing about this festival that's really amazing is that it's very practical for us as musicians because the people that are hosting the house concerts oftentimes host the musicians as well.
House concerts go way back to classical music. Mozart did house concerts. Now it's this wonderful tradition that anybody can do. You don't have to have a lot of money to put one of these on. And instead of writing a $10,000 check to the orchestra, you take in an artist in your home.
Never let it be said that Arts Upload is without educational value.
Our final story this week includes the words tetrahedron and octahedron, among others.
It's about an artist in Shreveport, Louisiana, who wants to help kids learn math while enjoying her work.
I decided that as a calculus teacher, you need three-dimensional experience. You need to see what 3D looks like. You need to be able to picture it. You need to be able to hold it. I have a bunch of puzzles based on the dissection of cubes, and a lot of those are very simple, and they show the different ways you can cut up a cube to make a good puzzle. And the plastic cubes are all the same size. So they're prisms, there are all kinds of solids in there. They're cube octahedra, they're octahedra there, so the kids can learn the relationships. Every solid has a certain amount of edges, a certain amount of corners, and a certain amount of faces. And there is a relationship that always holds if you count those things up. The number of faces, the number of edges, the number of vertices. You always can get the pattern that the sum of the faces and the vertices equals the edges plus 2. So F plus V equals E plus 2 in every figure you see here, except the ones that are stars. And when the families come and they work these things together, and you see them all trying to put all those things back in that cube there. It's amazing. They're very enthusiastic about it, and whether they know they're learning something or not, they are. The family interaction to me is important.
Not only can you see mathematical shapes and patterns in Evan's puzzles, you can also see them in her paintings. But she says that the patterns are not the most important part of her paintings.
Make an interesting painting that's pleasant to look at if you don't know any math and don't care about any math. But if you want to go further, there are other layers to look at this painting in. You can look at the math in the painting. And that you might be interested, you might not. And I began with the Platonic solids, of course. There are 5 solids that the Greeks used and that have been used and that have been appealing to people for centuries. There's the tetrahedron, which the school children are making downstairs when they all come here. That's got 4 triangular sides. There is the cube that's got 6 square sides. There is the octahedron that has 8 triangular sides. There's the icosahedron that has 20 triangular sides. And there's the dodecahedron that has 12 pentagonal sides. And it's the only one that can be made with pentagons that's a regular figure. This green and pink thing is based on what I call a cube octahedron. A cube octahedron is a solid that has 6 square faces and 8 triangular faces. And if you were to picture stretching this thing over a frame, if it were made out of rubber and you stretched it over a frame and flattened it all out, you can look at this painting and see that you have a square in the middle. The square is flanked by 4 triangles, which are flanked by 4 more 4-sided figures that are distorted squares because we've distorted 3 dimension into 2 when we do that. And then there are 4 more triangles on each edge of the painting. And so it's loosely based on a cube octahedron in 2 dimensions. I've got one with a butterfly in the middle, the thing about symmetry. I've got one with a chambered nautilus in the middle, and that's the nautilus spiral is the same as the spiral that's generated by those straight lines in that painting. I wanted it to look like a beach painting. I began noticing that I was using all these sharp diagonals and all these, and then I started painting seashells and got really fascinated with the seashells, and the spirals in the seashells were wonderful, and I knew they all had equations. And so I started actually purposefully putting spiral things in my paintings. For instance, the sunflower painting over there has got, the middles of the sunflowers are spirals.
And that is all the time we have this week to share art, music, theater, and dance with you.
But we'll be back next week with stories about V-Tran and A. Zahner.
From here at the Mills Record Company in Westport, I'm Randy Mason.
And I'm Maris Aylward. Thanks for watching.
Production funding for Arts Upload has been provided in part by Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation, Hall Family Foundation, Francis Family Foundation, the Hartwig Family, Richard J. Stern Foundation for the Arts, Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, and viewers like you. Thank you.